Welcome to Moneyweb at Midday, the actuality news show, offering unique insights and in-depth analysis featuring South Africa's top business leaders, newsmakers, and analysts for today's professionals. Your host, Jeremy Maggs.
Hello, and thank you for listening to Moneyweb at Midday. In the next 30 minutes, I'll put some context around the numbers, perspective around the politics, and clarity around the choices facing us in South Africa. A warm welcome. I'm Jeremy Maggs. Coming up on the program today, the family speaks after the alleged KZN Club Med rape. Can procurement make or break South Africa's infrastructure drive? Hotels are filling up, so why aren't profits following? And Johannesburg's street food earns a place on the world stage. It's Friday, the 7th of August. An 18-year-old Canadian guest has reported an alleged sexual assault involving a Club Med employee at the group's new Tinley Manor resort in KZN. Now, the accused has been arrested and is presumed innocent until proven guilty. Club Med says it's cooperating with the authorities, but the complainant's family says serious questions still remain about how the matter was handled and what support was provided. I want to talk now to Pearl Walsh, who is the family's authorized spokesperson. Pearl, welcome to you. Stripping away the emotion then, are there key facts that the family wants placed on record today?
Yes, there are a few key factors which are of high concern to the family as to how the investigation and the preservatives of the medical records have been handled. There was also a major concern from the family, having been guests of Club Med, that from the time they found the boy at 3 a.m. in the morning, the management was called, and the management did not pay any attention to the incidents that happened, even though there were two security guards, one who drove the boy from where he seemed to have been found lost, close to the staff quarters, back to the hotel rooms, and another security then came and asked the boy, "Why are you crying? You are disturbing the guest." They went and knocked onto the parents' bedroom, and that's when the parents was alerted that something is wrong with the son. They then called the management. Management then answered, but didn't attend to the guest. They then, since 3 a.m. in the morning, asked the security, "How can we contact the police? How can we get a doctor? Our son is in a severe status, traumatic status, and emotional status." And only after 8, the manager surfaced. Only then they got the police number. The father called the police, and 15 minutes later the police arrived. And we are hoping as the family that the crime scene was secured and swabbed correctly, that we have all the necessary evidence that we require.
So you raise issues about the way in which it's been investigated so far and also about preservation of records. Please amplify that for me.
Look, our preservation is the fact that Club Med is a family-orientated hospitality industry. The management didn't pay any attention to his guest for such a serious incident that has happened on their premises. Then the other part is Club Med did not communicate with the family since the 22nd of July. First newspaper article surfaced. So only on the 2nd of August, we received communication from Club Med Global Management to the father, and the father then referred global management back to me to say, "Ms. Walsh is the spokesperson and she represents the family. Please communicate with them." Club Med Global Management then refuses to communicate with me or to channel all the communication via me, and we strictly sent them a confirmation of email that it is not their duty to dictate who the family representative should be or who should be the spokesperson on behalf of the family to overlook this intense criminal matter.
Now, Club Med says appropriate procedures were implemented and that it is cooperating fully with the authorities. Pearl, what specifically does the family believe should have been handled differently?
There should have been a common courtesy as far as hospitality is concerned. That didn't happen from the onset. Club Med none of the representatives have called to say, are you okay? Is there anything that we can do? How can we assist you? I actually went to Club Med 2 days ago. I was turned away from the gate. I asked to speak to HR and management after we'd been to magistrate court and after bail was issued to the accused. They wouldn't speak to me. Now, we do not have a legal battle with Club Med. We have a criminal incident with an accused who is an employee, and the crime scene happened at Club Med on their premises. I merely wanted to introduce myself on behalf of the family, basically see how can we try to consolidate or to bring this to closure sooner so that the family doesn't have to go through this trauma, that they are able to assist us with the investigation so that we are the criminal and the accused for what has transpired, because the boy's life will never be the same. The family's life has been changed dramatically as far as an emotional, psychological aspect is concerned. They will need therapy. They have started therapy and treatment already. However, there's been no compassion from Club Med's side. My concerns were that the pre-bail hearing wasn't handled accordingly as to what we would have expected, or in order to have identified that the DNA should have been done before bail was allowed.
Pearl, let me jump in here. The accused disputes the allegations and maintains the encounter was consensual. I would ask what evidence the family believes investigators and ultimately the court needs to examine in deciding between the different versions.
That is correct. The accused, of course, have no alternative defense other than to counterclaim or contradict and create a fabricated dispute of fact that this was consensual.
Pearl Walsh, one again with an eye on time, I just want to put one more question to you. The family has also raised a concern that the complainant's drink may have been tampered with. Is there any evidence supporting that at this stage, or is it still something that investigators are being asked to establish?
At this point, I have been pushing investigators. I spoke to the captain of the investigating unit this morning. Again, I've been promised the whole week that the medical kit or the second medical kit will be processed so that we can understand exactly the intoxication of the levels. The boy did seem disorientated. He was not in the right frame of mind when the parents found him. And this is not how they left him, which means he must have had some substance or substitute of substance other than the alcohol in his blood content, yes.
Pearl Walsh, thank you very much indeed. Moneyweb at Midday has reached out to Club Med and we have not heard back. We will continue to do so.
You're listening to Moneyweb at Midday.
Now, South Africa plans to spend something in the region of 1.07 trillion rand on public infrastructure over the next 3 years. All well and good. But the country's record of delays, cost overruns, corruption and abandoned projects raises a central question, I think. Will that money produce functioning roads, railways, water systems and power infrastructure, or, as we have heard in the past, another collection of costly promises? Now, procurement leaders argue that their profession needs to move beyond finding the cheapest supplier to become a driver of resilience, of industrialization and economic growth. And someone who can give us a big picture view on this is Ben Farrell, Global Chief Executive Officer of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. Ben, a very warm welcome. An interesting thesis that you're proposing. Is procurement genuinely capable, in your opinion, of driving economic growth? Or maybe, as some critics might say, you're overstating what one business function can achieve in often what is a badly governed system?
Sure. Thanks very much. I've had the opportunity to see different models working in different places around the world, and I'm extremely optimistic about the thesis, as you describe it, that we're proposing, because you can see where this is playing out effectively, the linkage I'm describing between procurement decisions, economic growth and national resilience. And increasingly, I'm seeing governments particularly start thinking in those terms, and we're helping governments through SIPs, and we have members in 180 countries around the world thinking in these terms and developing strategies, because 4 decades of globalization has made people think mostly around cost as the predominant driver, i.e. getting things for the lowest possible cost. And recent disruption through all sorts of factors that we know only too well, and also climate change, etc., making everybody rightly rethink that vulnerability and fragility. So I'm seeing an increased view of regionalization and nearshoring, as people call it in supply chain terms, i.e. reducing the length of the supply chain and driving some resilience, but also I think there's an opportunity for prosperity through that. So, if you view procurement as it's perhaps historically been viewed, you might reach that conclusion. But what we're seeing is what I'm describing as the stars have aligned in terms of the nature of the world we live in today and the requirement to respond to events, the nature of business being extended enterprise with many suppliers operating together for collective success, artificial intelligence unlocking value where people haven't seen it before, the access to good data to do that, and the need to then redesign supply chains, growing populations, particularly in Africa. So all these factors are coming into play. This is a moment to evolve the thinking around this, and we're actually doing something called the Great Conversation now, which is a global dialogue. That's why I'm out and about traveling so much, hearing from professionals about the skills and competencies needed to thrive in the future. What we call procurement now, in a year or two, it's going to be, you could rightly continue to describe it as procurement, but increasingly I might start describing it as something else, because it ends up managing risk, technology, artificial intelligence, lots more to it than the notion of going out and buying things for an organization. It's a bigger idea.
I want to circle back to cost in just a moment, but as you referenced, this entire process has got a very long tail. Where does the infrastructure process most often break down? Is it in the project design, in other words, upfront, tendering, selection of supplier, or when it comes to the end of the process, contract management?
I think, honestly, it'd be tough for me to say specifically around every infrastructure. Predominantly, I've often seen it where the specification, the statement of requirement, becomes a bit of a moving target, and that sometimes introduces friction from the very outset. If you imagine it as a process end to end, if you don't get it right in the specification, what's being procured for to start with and described, then it starts to become difficult, and requirements change at the 11th hour. People are surprised by the outcome of it, and it's often about the clarity of the specifications. Concept development, really.
Ben, in the South African idiom, the big elephant in the room is always corruption. How can procurement professionals resist political interference when often their careers may depend on the same politicians and executives who are applying the pressure? And as I ask that question, I'm assuming that it's not just one unique to this country.
Well, firstly, on your last point, as I said, I've travelled around a lot of African nations, and almost the first thing that people say to me is, we could be an extraordinarily prosperous continent, economically booming, but we have a problem with corruption. And that may take different forms in different places, but it is a common theme across the continent. And I leave thinking about this. And, I've been talking a lot about Pan-Africanism and everyone's ambition around Pan-Africanism. And I was thinking, how do we start this in a modest way? And it's been interesting talking to a few governments recently, and we have a thing called the SIPS ethical certification that you can do on an individual or organizational level. And I've been encouraging some governments to say, well, we're going to commit to this and make a very clear stance, because everybody's saying it's a problem. Everyone is looking for a way to respond. And what we can't imagine suddenly we're going to stop it dead, but what we could do collectively across the continent is commit very, very publicly to certifying individuals and organization is committed to it as a step in the right direction. I'm not going to pretend that's going to, answer every possible question and deal with corruption straight off. But do you know what? There is a real ambition to deal with it, which is fantastic. And I think that's the way we could start heading in that direction and showing where the benefits of that are playing out, where, nations begin to thrive because actually, corruption is rooted out and the upside of that is shared more widely.
Within the South African operating sphere, you'll be aware that local content rules and supply development obviously creates jobs, but they can also raise prices and delay projects. And again, within the South African dynamic, that is very evident. Where does the balance lie, do you think?
No, I think it's important. You put your finger on the balance. How do you get the balance right? Because I see more and more countries being very specific about local content because of, the reasons you're describing, the employment opportunities, economic growth. But again, then there's the question mark around, global supply opportunities and cost and the like. And I think it's very sensible to have a policy that says where possible and where it makes sense to favour local content. And I see this, I say, throughout the Middle East. It's now increasingly across Africa. In fact, the European Union have recently introduced some legislation which largely says the same thing. The new Prime Minister in Great Britain has said pretty much the same thing. So more and more countries heading that direction. And as you describe, it's a balance to make sensible judgments in that. But sometimes I think those judgments need to be seen over time. If you take a short-term view of the total cost of ownership or the total cost of impact of your decisions, if you take a short-term view of that, you're not going to get to the right answer. So sometimes it may look more expensive, but you think about the opportunity that's removing from, employment support or the wider implications on a nation of those choices. So I think these things have to be seen through a very big prism about what's most beneficial over time.
Thank you very much indeed. That's Ben Farrell, Global Chief Executive Officer of the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply. Is property making a comeback, or are investors walking into another trap? Join Moneyweb Deputy Editor Suren Naidu in conversation with Kundai Munzada from Sesfakile Capital and Ian Anderson from Merchant West Investments as they unpack whether property still deserves a place in your portfolio. Discover where the opportunities lie, the risks to watch, and how interest rates, valuations, and market demand are reshaping property investing. Tuesday, the 1st of September at the Sandton Convention Centre. Register for free using the promo code MONEYWEB. Visit moneyweb.co.za and secure your seat today.
Moneyweb at midday for all your up-to-date stories.
South Africa's hospitality sector says demand is recovering, and that's good news, I guess. But rising costs, skill shortages, and unreliable infrastructure continue to prevent stronger occupancies from translating into healthier profits. So I guess it raises the bigger question, can the industry continue blaming the operating environment, or do hotels need to rethink? Do they need to regroup on how they price, invest and manage their business? Someone at the centre of this very important debate, because we know how critical tourism is to the South African economy, is Anton Gillis, who's the new Chief Executive Officer of Platinum Hospitality Holdings. Anton, good to talk to you. So if demand is recovered, what's your perception then? Why is the hospitality sector still struggling to make a sufficient profit?
Jeremy, great to connect again. Thank you. I think there are two aspects to your question. Has demand really recovered? We were sent the Stats SA income arrival statistics for last quarter, and we don't believe that they're entirely accurate. They show an increase in African travelers coming into South Africa, but what does that really mean? We believe that these are not tourists coming into the country. These are people coming into the country for business, and a lot of them are choosing to stay in the country. We haven't seen an influx of business we've seen pre-COVID, specifically in the Asian market. Remember, we used to drive around and see huge coaches of Chinese travelers. Well, where they post-COVID, we haven't seen them come back. We've got an asset on the Garden Route, which was filled predominantly with the Indian market. They too are absent post-COVID. So I think arrivals are stifled. We, as an industry, are begging for international travel, a couple of extra charter flights. There are rumors going around that there's 3 new arrivals coming into Cape Town from the States. We look forward to that because everyone will benefit greatly. We know that there's a shortage of global aircraft, and that also stifles everyone's best intentions. So I think on the demand side, there's room for growth. There's a lot more hotel beds in South Africa, so we need a lot more tourists just to see hotels trade through this.
And Anton, if that trajectory then continues, and there's every indication then that it might, that does not bode well for your sector, does it?
Well, yes and no. We have a long-term view. We see this over 15 to 20 years from today, and we've always had such a long horizon. What we need is just stable tourists coming to explore South Africa. The latest Trevor Noah ad that's been flighted globally, we think will do wonders. He touches on an important aspect, and there's far more to South Africa than just coming to Cape Town. There are many beautiful destinations within our country one could explore.
If I understand your thinking, you and I guess others in the industry want hospitality treated as a strategic economic infrastructure. Your words, I think. What specific government support then are you asking taxpayers to provide?
Before we go to taxpayers, we would want governments themselves to see us as a strategic pillar. South African tourism has been dysfunctional for too many years now. It doesn't seem to be a priority of anyone to get that fixed. We have the hugest amount of respect for Minister de Lille. The reality is, unfortunately, she's coming to the end of her term. So we are really worried for what this looks like without her. We know there are 4 announcements coming to the South African Tourism Board imminently. We know of at least one of the 4 who's been appointed, and that's a very good sign of the future. What we would need from government is, and it's difficult, but there's something called a 1% tourism levy, which for the longest time hotels have contributed to. With the advent of apart hotels and other short-term operators, majority of those do not contribute to the 1% tourism levy. And that levy serves as a purpose to promote Destination South Africa. That's where we all collectively work together to go fetch some foreign tourists. Without them supporting that, the traditional hotels who still fund it are working for the greater good, which is not entirely fair on everyone. We would also love to see a reformation of a tourism body where we could collectively get together to brainstorm, to strategize with all competition considerations accounted for. The collapse of FedHasa nationally has really left us in a difficult position where we're just growing further apart as an industry. We're not coming together.
And the difficulty is that operators, as I understand it then, Anton, are reportedly deferring any capital investment. But there's an upside risk there in as much as that weakening the guest experience can create an even bigger problem later down the line, surely.
100%, Jeremy. I wrote an article where I reference it's no longer relevant to have stars outside of a hotel to establish its level of quality. In the 90s and early 2000s, we used to go through a rigorous grading process and fight for every star we so rightly thought we deserved. The reality is the guest is the judge of that these days. Your most recent 10 guest reviews will give a very good impression of how your asset is holding. What we're not seeing is a lot of reinvestment back into assets. There are a lot of tired, old, poorly run hotels that should be doing a lot better. But it's no fault of the owners. Unfortunately, they just simply can't reinvest because they haven't had rate growth year on year. They're sitting in the same rates they've charged for the last 10 years. So while expenses are growing at 18 to 20% year on year, their total income is only growing just below inflation usually. And that's not sustainable.
Just a final question. I understand that a lot of that pressure is systemic, but surely the industry itself has got to carry some of the blame here. How much of the problems reflect on poor cost control or maybe even outdated business models?
I've got a different view. I think in COVID, we were all forced to really look inside and reform and reshape how we run our business. I think with the introduction of AI and one's ability to truly understand their own data, we've never been at such a competitive space. I think hotels are being run prudently. I think there's some really clever operators out there. I think it comes back to an average daily rate. I don't think we're charging enough for what we're delivering and what we aspire to deliver.
Anton Gillis, thank you very much indeed, the Chief Executive Officer of the Platinum Hospitality Holdings Group.
You're listening to Moneyweb at Midday.
Johannesburg, I read, has been ranked the 8th best city in the world for street food by Time Out. I guess then placing its quarters, its indigenous ingredients and myriad township flavors alongside some of Asia and Latin America's most celebrated food cultures. But I also wonder if a global ranking can create meaningful economic opportunities for informal traders, or is it just going to remain a little more than just an international bragging right? Let's discuss that in a little more detail. I'm in conversation now with Aisha Mohammed, who's Managing Director at Time Out South Africa. Aisha, welcome and thank you very much. A top 10 is a great accolade. What gives Johannesburg the edge, do you think?
Thank you, Jeremy, firstly, for having me. I think the excitement just in and around our culture is really starting to take shape from a lifestyle perspective. And food, most importantly, really has the ability to, connect audiences from around the world, travelers alike, but also just the beauty of what we have in South Africa, right? You mentioned the indigenous flavors. You mentioned just the township kind of flavors and the way in which we've brought all of that to life over years through recipes that have, shaped the generations of South Africans, and the way in which they embrace food and the way in which they experience food. So I think we've got such a deeply rooted culture in food and the way in which food has evolved and the way in which flavor has evolved that we're really starting to get recognized and noticed the world over, because the amount of content that we produce just at Time Out alone around beautiful storytelling on entrepreneurs and their stories and their quotas and their street vendors and, the pop-up shops that they do around recipes that have been brought in through their family generation after generation, but also just the way in which they're evolving it as generations change, has really come to life in this top 10 listing, because it's those stories that we're telling, right? It's the real stories, and it's real storytelling through generations. But then what that's done for South Africa specifically is it's created beautiful entrepreneurial storytelling. So entrepreneurial storytelling in the way in which they're growing business. We've seen now out of the backyard of homes. Hloni is an example, who's somebody we covered recently, had 10,000 Rand, his mom left him with 10,000 Rand. She was terminally ill. He had to build a business with that, and has done so beautifully through something as simple as a quota, which costs you anything between 15, 16 Rand to 20 Rand, and he's built a beautiful business at the backyard of his house, which he's serving guests daily. Once Time Out covered it on our local platform, firstly Time Out Johannesburg, and then to the global platform, he's completely inundated, in terms of queues every single weekend. And it's that beautiful storytelling that we love, because it's real. It's genuine.
It's such an encouraging story, but in the work that you've done then in this space, you also, I imagine, would have come across obstacles that prevent successful vendors from growing into sustainable businesses. And that, after all, I guess, is the aspiration for most people in that space.
Yeah, absolutely. And that will be many, like any other business, entrepreneurs face exactly the same challenges right across the board, whether it's in food or finance, it's all the same thing. And we see it on a daily basis. And ours is to try and assist and grow South African storytelling so that South African businesses grow. And that we are able to provide a little bit of a platform, I guess, to local vendors, local street sellers, local young entrepreneurs on a global scale. So that for us is important, because we're trying to bring a global audience into what is very proudly South African, into something that is local storytelling, so that we can help and build and boost business in a way in which, gives an international kind of lens and a global lens.
Do you think a street food experience is top of mind for a tourist coming into this country?
Definitely. I think, and we're seeing it from a Time Out perspective the world over. And that is now in terms of like culture and what moves culture, because I think the fine dining is always going to be sought after. People are always looking for beautifully, highly curated experience. But I think what Time Out's mission is to provide the best of a city. And when you say best of a city, that means everything from something that costs 14 Rand to 14,000, right? And it's about providing the best experience. So if that is a 14 Rand quota, that is the best, in let's say in Soweto as opposed to, the CBD, then we would cover it. But I think the interest level from international travelers as well as local alike is around authenticity. It's growing much more in terms of like real experience. So if I arrive in Johannesburg, South Africa, if I arrive in Cape Town, what is truly authentic to the city? And that can be, like we say, anything from 49 to 14,000, but it's about whether I can truly experience the flavor and the culture of the people. And I think that is done beautifully with food, and I think what we have is also deep storytelling in culture through food as well. So it's not, the flavors come with a story. And I think that is exactly the type of thing that travelers alike are interested in, is about where does this come from and why,
Do you think, Aisha, there's a danger that as we push international attention, such as you've done, it might then push up prices and turn affordable community food into a product aimed mainly at tourists? That's a navigable risk, or isn't it?
Not really. I think that it depends on the type of business. So I think if you're actively aiming at international travelers and at tourists, I think you can potentially have the opportunity, as an example, depending on your location, to charge a little bit more. And, you have the interest level from an international tourist. But what we are doing is beautiful storytelling for local travel equally as we are to allow for global travel and global interest, because we are a global brand. So we don't necessarily see it happen, just in terms of like the way in which people move locally. So we are time out Joburg, time out Cape Town, time out Durban. And we obviously the travel is happening in all the major cities, and the interest level from the audience is coming, from a local platform. Or from a local audience far more than it is from the international one at this stage. And the storytelling is kind of what resonates with local travel in any case. So traveling into Cape Town, and whether you do it often or whether you do it maybe once in a year, or whether you do it once in 5 years, it's always going to be of interest that when you land in a place that you want to try something new, or you want to experience something new, or you want to experience a new taste. So we see that, it has had little effect in terms of like, making a massive change in the way in which businesses are positioning themselves. What we have seen is that it's growing business, which is what we love.
Aisha, I've got this sudden yearning for a quarter as we have this conversation, and I'm annoyed because I've still got more work to do. But thank you thank you so much for the conversation. Aisha Mohammed is Managing Director at Time Out South Africa. Appreciate your time. Thank you. And that's where we are going to leave it for today and for the week. You've been listening to Moneyweb at midday. We are here every weekday at noon with the latest in current affairs, the economy and policy. You can always catch the podcast version a little later. Thank you for making us part of your day. Until next time, goodbye.
Listen to the daily live stream of Moneyweb at midday or download episodes on moneyweb.co.za, the Moneyweb app, Apple Podcasts and Spotify, or follow Moneyweb News on social media for more updates. Moneyweb, your trusted source for business and investment insights.